General Hospital spoilers for Thursday, August 14th reveal that Chase found himself speaking with Willow in a quiet moment. The kind that seemed to suspend the rush of daily life and allow for truths to surface. There was no need to dress his words in pretense. And perhaps that was why his thoughts began to flow with a clarity he hadn't anticipated. He spoke about the changes that had been creeping into their lives, not in loud, dramatic bursts, but in slow, deliberate increments that were just now revealing their cumulative effect. It began with a shift in how people around them communicated, a subtle change in tone. A guardedness that hadn't always been there. Old friends seemed to measure their words more carefully, new acquaintances carried an intensity that suggested hidden agendas. And long-standing alliances no longer moved with the ease of shared history. Chase admitted to Willow that at first, he thought it was just him noticing these details. But now he saw the same recognition in her eyes, a shared awareness that something fundamental was evolving. He described how the recent merging of certain interests, both personal and professional, was unlike anything they had experienced before. It wasn't simply cooperation for convenience or mutual benefit, it was a deeper kind of integration, where decisions in one area rippled into others. Where victories and failures no longer belonged solely to the individuals who achieved them but were absorbed into a collective identity that seemed to be taking shape all around them. This fusion of old loyalties and new objectives carried a strange duality. It offered strength through unity, but it also introduced the risk of losing individuality. Of having one's own choices blurred by the will of the group. Chase's voice was low but steady as he acknowledged that while this change could bring stability, it could just as easily breed dependency, leaving them vulnerable to forces beyond their control. Willow listened with a stillness that made him feel both supported and exposed. Her presence encouraging him to say more. He confessed that part of him feared what this might mean for their ability to act freely when the moment called for it. If every choice now had to pass through the filter of this new, interconnected network of relationships, how long before spontaneity and personal conviction were replaced by calculated compliance? At the same time, he couldn't deny that there was a comfort in knowing they were part of something larger. That there was a structure, however new and untested, that promised security in uncertain times. It was a paradox he couldn't easily resolve. The desire for independence set against the undeniable pull of unity. Chase reflected on how this transformation was affecting even the most private moments. Conversations that used to be straightforward now seemed layered with unspoken considerations, and interactions once taken at face value were now examined for deeper meaning. He recognized in himself a growing instinct to anticipate the long-term consequences of every word, every gesture. Not just for him but for everyone connected to him through this emerging web of alliances. It was exhausting in a way, but it also sharpened his awareness, making him more strategic, more deliberate. He admitted to Willow that perhaps this was the true nature of the change. They were no longer simply reacting to the world, they were learning to navigate it as players in a much larger, more complex game. He thought about how trust was evolving in this environment. In the past, trust had been built on familiarity, on the quiet accumulation of shared experiences. Now, it seemed to be measured against utility, how useful someone could be to the broader structure, how aligned their actions were with the group's evolving goals. This new form of trust wasn't necessarily weaker, but it was different, more conditional, and it demanded a level of vigilance they hadn't been accustomed to before. Chase wondered aloud if they were witnessing the birth of a new order in their world, one where survival depended not on standing out but on fitting seamlessly into the collective. As he spoke, Chase realized that his observations were not just an analysis of external changes but also a mirror of his own transformation. He was adapting, recalibrating his instincts to meet the demands of this shifting landscape. Where once he might have acted on impulse, he now found himself pausing, weighing the implications, considering the ripple effects. It was not a loss of courage, but a refinement of it, an understanding that in this new reality, the boldest move might be the one that preserved the balance rather than disrupted it. Willow's gaze never wavered as she absorbed his words. Her silence a testament to the gravity of what he was sharing. In that moment, Chase felt the unspoken agreement between them. They could not stop the change from coming, but they could choose how to face it. They could decide whether to let it erode their sense of self or to shape it in a way that honored who they were while embracing what they could become. And as he looked at her, Chase knew that this conversation, born out of quiet reflection, was itself a sign of the transformation, proof that they were no longer navigating their lives in isolation but as part of something broader. Something that demanded both caution and courage in equal measure. Michael's words to Gio came at a moment when the younger man stood at a fragile crossroads. Burdened by uncertainty and simmering frustration over the direction his life was taking. In the quiet corner of the room, away from the noise of the others, Michael leaned in with the kind of calm authority that only came from surviving his own share of battles. He reminded Gio that life rarely unfolded in a straight, predictable line. And that sometimes the greatest growth came from moments of discomfort and challenge. His tone was firm but not unkind, urging Gio to see the chaos in his personal life not as a sign of failure, but as a necessary upheaval that could clear the way for something stronger. Gio listened in silence, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to Emma. And the tension that had been gnawing at them for weeks. Their connection, once vibrant and unshakable, now seemed frayed and volatile, sparking arguments that left both of them drained. It wasn't just the disagreements, it was the sense that they were standing on opposite shores, each unwilling or unable to swim toward the other. Michael, sensing the depth of the strain, spoke carefully, knowing that advice in these matters had to be measured. He didn't tell Gio to give up on Emma, nor did he suggest pushing through at all costs. Instead, he encouraged Gio to focus on who he wanted to become regardless of the relationship's outcome, stressing that personal stability and self-respect would ultimately shape any future, whether Emma was in it or not. Gio took in the words. Recognizing that Michael wasn't sugarcoating the truth, there was a real possibility that his relationship with Emma might not survive the current storm. And yet, there was also a possibility that by confronting his own insecurities and learning to manage his emotions, he could rebuild something even stronger, with Emma or someone else. The tension with Emma wasn't going away overnight. The fights had roots in deeper fears, her worries about his ambitions, his resentment over her doubts, and the unspoken pressure both felt to prove themselves. Michael knew this wasn't just about romance, it was about identity, about Joe's need to decide who he was and where he was going. He urged him to stop making decisions out of fear or pride, to take the time to reflect on what truly mattered. As the conversation unfolded, Gio felt a small but noticeable shift inside. The pressure in his chest eased just enough to let in a flicker of hope. Michael's words didn't erase the problems with Emma, but they reframed them. This wasn't simply the end of something, it could be the beginning of a transformation. For the first time in weeks, Gio considered that the road ahead, though uncertain, might be one he could walk with purpose, regardless of whether Emma walked beside him. The night stretched on, but that quiet exchange lingered in Joe's mind like a steady drumbeat, guiding him toward choices he had yet to make, but now felt more prepared to face. Molly had been quietly watching the tides of conflict shift in Port Charles, her mind constantly worrying with the calculations of how best to keep everyone she cared about safe. She knew Drew's influence was spreading in ways that were both strategic and deeply personal. And she could see how his decisions were beginning to create ripples far beyond his intended targets. Drew, in his current state, seemed fixated on a path that allowed little room for empathy or reconsideration, a path built on control, retaliation, and an unyielding need to secure his own position of dominance. Molly had hoped that their long history and shared experiences would give her the leverage she needed to reach him, to pierce through the hardened exterior he was wearing like armor. But every conversation lately had left her feeling as though she was speaking to a stranger who had closed himself off from reason. Her greatest concern was Danny. The young man was teetering dangerously close to legal trouble, his name already being whispered in the same breath as potential charges. And Molly knew that if Drew didn't step back from the choices he was making, Danny could find himself pulled into the undertow. Molly's instincts told her that this wasn't just about one incident, it was part of a larger pattern of adjustments and maneuvers that Drew had been making. Adjustments that were changing the power dynamics in ways few had fully noticed yet. It was as though he had re-engineered his entire approach to conflict, willing to bend the truth, manipulate circumstances, and push people into corners if it meant securing the outcome he wanted. To Molly, this was more than just a tactical shift, it was the manifestation of a new kind of obsession. Drew wasn't merely responding to events as they unfolded, he was shaping them. Steering them with precision, and in doing so, he was letting himself be consumed by the idea of winning at all costs. She recognized the signs of someone who believed they were always a step ahead. Someone whose confidence in their control had blinded them to the emotional wreckage left behind. And the wreckage was already showing. Relationships were fraying, trust was evaporating. And even the people who had once stood firmly in Drew's corner were beginning to question his true motives. Molly had made it her mission to intervene before this obsession spiraled into something irreversible. She could feel the weight of urgency pressing against her chest every time she saw Danny's name surface in conversation, every time she caught a glimpse of Drew's calculating expression. She knew how easily the legal system could swallow a young man whole, especially if the wrong people decided it was politically or personally beneficial to make an example out of him. In Molly's mind, Danny's future was not just a matter of avoiding arrest, it was about preserving his sense of hope, his belief that he could rise above the shadows cast by other people's actions. But convincing Drew of this was proving to be the greatest challenge. He saw his maneuvers as protection, as necessary adjustments to secure his family's stability. And he believed that keeping certain levers in motion would ultimately keep Danny safe. Molly saw it differently. To her, these so-called safeguards were actually tightening the noose, trapping Danny in a cycle of suspicion and association. She needed Drew to understand that every calculated step he took in this direction only drew more attention, that his methods, while clever, were creating the exact conditions in which Danny could become collateral damage. She planned her next move carefully, knowing that if she pushed too hard, Drew might shut her out entirely. She had to walk the fine line between appealing to the man she once knew, the man with a moral compass strong enough to lead him through war zones, and challenging the man he was becoming, who seemed far more comfortable with moral compromise. In Molly's mind, there was still time to reverse the course, to unravel the threads of this dangerous new obsession before they wove themselves into an inescapable trap. The clock was ticking, and Molly could feel it with every passing day. Drew's adjustments, his obsession, and his strategic control had set events in motion that could not be easily undone. But as long as she still had the chance to speak, to reason, and to fight for Danny's future, she refused to believe it was too late. For Molly, this wasn't just about legal consequences, it was about pulling someone she cared about back from the edge before the person she knew was gone entirely, swallowed by the shadow of the man he had become. ChatGPT de NOI. Dante and Brooke Lynn found themselves working more closely together than either had anticipated. Their partnership forming not just out of convenience, but out of a shared concern that had been building for weeks. The situation surrounding Gio had begun to take on a life of its own. No longer confined to small incidents or minor misunderstandings, but evolving into a complex web of tension, uncertainty, and emotional strain that neither of them could ignore. Brooke Lynn could see it in Dante's eyes every time Joe's name came up. There was a flicker of unease there, a quiet acknowledgement that what they were dealing with wasn't just a passing phase. Joe's behavior, his choices, and the growing rift with those around him had created a subtle but undeniable undercurrent of trouble. And both Dante and Brooke Lynn knew it was only a matter of time before something much bigger broke loose. The changes they were witnessing were not random. They were deliberate, calculated, and spoke to a deeper shift in the way Gio was handling his life and relationships. It was as though something had taken root in him, an obsession. A compulsion to push boundaries and control situations in ways that left others unsettled. For Dante, who had spent his career reading people and recognizing the patterns that led to trouble, this was a flashing red warning sign. For Brooke Lynn, who cared deeply but had a tendency to act on impulse, it stirred a restless energy that made her want to step in and set things right before they spiraled too far. Their partnership was built on different strengths. Dante brought patience, strategy, and the ability to see the bigger picture, while Brooke Lynn brought passion, emotional insight, and a willingness to challenge Gio in ways others might shy away from. But as they dug deeper into the tangled threads of his recent behavior, they both began to realize that this wasn't just about helping Gio avoid a few bad decisions. It was about protecting him from a path that could alter his future in ways none of them could reverse. The more they tried to guide him, the more they discovered about the forces at play around him. There were subtle influences, people in his orbit who didn't have his best interests at heart, and a growing sense that Gio himself was resisting any attempt to pull him back toward stability. Brooke Lynn noticed how he avoided certain questions. The moments when Joe's confidence faltered and his eyes betrayed a flash of doubt. Those glimpses told him there was still a chance to reach him, but the window was narrowing. As the days passed, Dante and Brooke Lynn found that their shared mission was affecting their own relationship. Working together under this kind of pressure forced them to confront the way they communicated, the way they trusted each other's instincts, and the way they balanced their emotional investment with the objectivity needed to make smart choices. There were moments of tension, when Brooke Lynn's urgency clashed with Dante's cautious approach, and moments of unexpected connection, when they realized that beneath their differences, they were united by the same fierce determination to protect someone they cared about. In trying to manage the chaos surrounding Gio, they were also navigating the shifting landscape between them, a landscape that was becoming more complicated by the day. What had started as a partnership of necessity was evolving into something more personal, something neither of them had planned for. And as Joe's situation grew more volatile, Dante and Brooke Lynn had to ask themselves not only how far they were willing to go to protect him, but also how much they were willing to risk in the process, because the changes they were seeing in him were mirrored, in quieter, more subtle ways, in themselves. Trina and Kai's relationship had, by all accounts, reached a breaking point. The quiet tension that had simmered between them for weeks had finally boiled over, and now it seemed like the damage was irreparable. They were at odds, their connection fraying as the emotional distance between them grew. Kai, who had once been full of quiet passion and dedication, now found himself retreating into a shell of uncertainty. Trina, equally confused and hurt, had started to withdraw, unsure of how to navigate the path between the love she still felt for him and the undeniable rift that had opened up between them. But Stella, ever the maternal figure, saw things differently. She saw in Kai the potential for growth, for maturity, and for an ability to stand up for what he wanted, even when the odds seemed stacked against him. She had watched him struggle with the weight of responsibility and control, but she also saw the depth of his feelings for Trina. In her mind, if Kai truly cared for her, if he still believed in their connection, he needed to fight for it, no matter how difficult it seemed. For Stella, love wasn't just about staying the course when things were easy. It was about taking risks, about standing tall even when the stakes were high. Sometimes, you have to fight for what you want, she told him one evening, her voice steady and filled with conviction. You can't just walk away. You owe it to yourself and to her to see this through, no matter what. Her words were like a call to action, stirring something deep within Kai. For so long, he had been caught in a cycle of doubt, weighed down by fears of inadequacy and the feeling that perhaps he wasn't enough for Trina. But Stella's reminder shifted something inside him. He realized that he couldn't just let go without giving everything he had to make it work. He had to fight for her, fight for them, because he knew in his heart that Trina was worth it. However, as the decision to fight began to crystallize in his mind, the consequences of his actions became apparent. Stella's encouragement had sparked a determination in him. But the more he tried to piece things together with Trina, the more difficult the path became. Their connection, which had once felt natural and effortless, now felt laden with history, with unspoken words and unresolved issues. Trina, who had always been strong and independent, was no longer the person he had known. Her own insecurities and frustrations had pushed her into a corner, and every attempt he made to reach out only seemed to deepen the divide. Yet, in the background, a more dangerous force was brewing, Kai's growing need for control. His desire to fight for Trina wasn't just about winning her back, it was also about proving something to himself, about demonstrating that he could keep things together, that he could control the chaos swirling around them. It wasn't enough for him to simply restore what they had. He wanted to dominate, to reshape the relationship on his terms. He was unwilling to let go of the image of them as a perfect couple, unwilling to accept the reality that perhaps, despite his best efforts, it wasn't meant to be. And that was where the true complications lay. Kai's attempts to control the situation weren't born of malice, but of desperation, a desire to fix what he felt was broken. Even if it meant pushing Trina to a place she wasn't ready to go. The more he tried to control the narrative, the more Trina recoiled. The very thing he thought would bring them closer was pushing them further apart. His need to fix things, to make it all right again, was creating new rifts. As Trina saw it as an attempt to box her in, to force her into a mold that didn't fit her anymore. The situation was rapidly escalating into a storm. As Kai's emotional turmoil and sense of control collided with Trina's growing desire for independence. Their once loving relationship, built on mutual respect and understanding, now seemed like a distant memory. And while Stella had meant well, her push for Kai to fight for Trina had inadvertently ignited the very conflict that threatened to tear them apart. Now, both Kai and Trina found themselves standing at opposite ends of a battlefield they hadn't expected to enter. What started as a desire for reconciliation had transformed into a struggle for dominance and control, as both parties tried to navigate their own desires and fears. Kai, emboldened by Stella's words, was willing to fight, but in doing so, he risked losing sight of the very reason he wanted to fight in the first place, Trina's happiness, her freedom, and her ability to make choices for herself. For Trina, it was clear that this wasn't just about Kai anymore. It was about her own autonomy, about reclaiming her sense of self in the wake of so much pressure, emotional manipulation, and the threat of losing her independence in the process of trying to salvage a relationship that was no longer healthy. She wanted to feel heard, to feel like her voice mattered. But every move Kai made toward control only furthered her belief that they were no longer compatible in the way they once had been. The situation had become a ticking time bomb. With both of them trapped in a vicious cycle of push and pull, each unable to escape the other's emotional grip. Kai's desire to control the outcome, to shape the relationship into what he wanted, had unknowingly set in motion the very destruction he feared. Meanwhile, Trina's struggle for independence was slowly becoming a battle for her own self-identity. As she fought not just against Kai's influence, but against the weight of their past together. This new, complex dynamic between them wasn't just about love anymore, it was about power, control, and freedom. And as both Kai and Trina navigated their way through the emotional maze they had created, it became increasingly clear that the path forward would require a choice, one that neither of them was fully prepared to make. Would Kai continue to push for control? Or would he finally let go and give Trina the space she needed to heal? Would Trina find a way to reclaim her independence? Or would the pull of their past and the weight of their shared history keep her tied to a relationship that no longer felt right? The next few weeks would be pivotal, as the tension between them grew. Each step forward threatening to pull them further apart while offering the hope of one last chance to rebuild what they had once shared. But in the end, it was clear that no matter the outcome, the changes in their relationship had become irreversible. What had once been a simple, passionate connection had turned into a complicated dance of control, independence, and emotional survival.